Okay. Thanks a lot for showing your patience, your interest in our conference. Having the last panel and being at the end of the discussion, obviously we are in a rather difficult situation because so many things were already addressed to and touched upon, but nevertheless that gives us a certain privilege that we can have the last word. And nobody will be able really then to come and to challenge what has been said. Well, we were discussing the issues of the internal changes in NATO, in European Union. Now it's a problem to address the NATO and the neighborhood, not close neighborhood, but just neighborhood. And the reason why we are addressing this issue is fairly clear. It was already quite clearly and very in an illuminating way presented by General Secretary Rasmussen when he said that NATO, thinking about security, cannot ignore the neighborhood and obviously must look to this, that neighborhood would be stable, would be predictable, would be friendly, and if not friendly, that at least somehow will be in acquiescence with European Union. And this neighborhood obviously is not only countries which geographically are close to NATO, but countries which are even somehow a bit more distant, but very important, like Russia. But talking about countries we should be concerned, we must also remember about countries like Ukraine, like Georgia, like Moldova, like Belarus, and that's why I think that in our discussion we will address all these issues. And let me begin with asking HeatherConley to kick off our discussion.
Thank you very much. Microphone, I knew it was going to bother me the whole time. It is a great pleasure to be with you. You know, this is a very daunting task for this panel. We stand between you and the start of your weekend, so we will really have to be on our toes this afternoon. I'd like to thank the Center for International Relations for this very kind invitation. Although this is a challenging panel, because not only do we get to comment on the preceding panel discussions, but sort of wrestle with, I think, the most core challenges that NATO faces. But let me begin by placing the strategic concept into its environment, and that's the transatlantic relationship as of today. I think we are at a very challenging moment. I think both the United States and Europe are increasingly turning inward. They are distracted domestically and economically. And so at a time when we need great leadership, decisive leadership, the centrifugal forces of the economic crisis and domestic politics seem to be pulling in the opposite direction. So within this context, we find three critical relationships: the United States relationship with NATO, the US relationship with the European Union, and then how NATO and the EU work together. And I just want to briefly touch on all three of them and then look towards the relationship towards Russia, the enlargement strategy, and then some thoughts on the partnership proposition. Really, since the last strategic concept in 1999, the United States has pushed NATO pretty hard. It pushed it very hard in capabilities. Remember the Prague, the Capabilities Initiative? And largely it has been unsuccessful in pushing the alliance to purchase those items which are critical to its success. And we've seen some of that certainly in Afghanistan. The enlargement, the United States pushed the enlargement agenda, not only in commemorating the 11th anniversary of Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, but I was a part of the next round of enlargement, which brought in the 7. And I remember when President Bush came to Warsaw in June of 2001 and gave this speech and said, you know, let's not do too little here. Let's see how far we can take this idea, and really introduce the Baltic to the Black Sea concept of enlargement, which made many of our Western European allies gulp at that thought at the time. And then September the 11th happened, and The United States, with solidarity from the rest of the alliance, invoked Article 5, and we went out of area or we were going to go out of business. You recall that slogan. So we went to Afghanistan, and we've been there for quite a while together. And I want to get back to something that Ambassador Racine had noted, and he talked about this balance between collective defense and territorial, collective defense and then expeditionary. It is a tricky balance, and it may be a false choice, but I think it is a choice, and it's a cost to that choice, and I just want to touch on that for a moment. There is a cost to support troops in Afghanistan. I assure you the American debate about the surge was in large measure the cost of supporting an additional troop contribution. How many times does the Polish finance minister and defense minister talk about the cost of extending a deployment of Polish troops in Afghanistan? So there's a cost in defense spending, and when European defense spending is appearing to be at all-time lows, an expeditionary force is an extra cost. What's the cost to the delay in transformation of many of the newest members who are caught halfway in their own transformation, but because of expenditures to Afghanistan? I had a chance last year to speak with the Lithuanian defense minister, and I assure you she has gutted her defense budget on the reform agenda because she had to support and wanted to. It wasn't that she did not want to, but it is a choice. And I think we all realize that there's a political cost to Afghanistan. And the political cost of having Afghanistan, with the exception of Denmark perhaps, being a fairly unpopular proposition, particularly in Europe. And so if the population sees NATO in Afghanistan not in its civil military capacity, but in its counterinsurgency, perhaps, strategy, that has a cost to public opinion. So I just want to note the balance is difficult indeed. So let's turn to the US-EU relationship. That relationship is undergoing some growing pains. The European Union is growing, and Washington finds it painful. That's a joke. A bad one, obviously. What's happening, I think, as the EU develops in its complexities in the post-Lisbon Treaty, it is difficult to follow the new institutions. We receive many visitors from the Commission, from the Parliament, now from the Council, Lady Ashton and her group, and it does cause some complexity to the relationship. But that's no reason for Washington to sort of raise its hand and goes, well, this is tough, you let me know when you figure it out. We have to understand this complexity. This complexity is going to impact US-European relations very strongly from here on out, whether that's a European Parliament decision on SWIFT, whether that's a new regulation that the Commission develops in financial regulatory. This relationship matters, and we need to understand it fully. And then there's the NATO-EU relationship. I really appreciated the Secretary General's comments, because when we talk about this, I get so frustrated because we can't move that relationship forward. And it's very difficult to understand how we are going to move it forward. The US doesn't have a strong role to play in that. This is revolving Turkey's evolution and its European perspective. It's addressing Cyprus. It's finding a way through that problem. And I thought the Secretary General had laid out some ideas. We have to stop talking about NATO-EU in sort of the abstract. We have to start working on fixing it, because if it remains the logjam that it is, both institutions and the broader transatlantic relationship are going to suffer. This window is closing rapidly. In fact, many could argue it closed in 2004. We have to get this on track, and we really need Europe to focus on that. So let me talk a little bit about Russia, and then I will pass the microphone down. What I thought I would do is be a bit of a contrarian to Ron Asmus's view on the dual approach.